I was sitting at my desk trying to focus on a client presentation when my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. It was my 28th birthday, and I thought maybe he was finally remembering. Instead, the message read, "Sold your laptop. Your sister needs new phone. Be grateful we feed you." My hands started shaking as I read it again. Then another text appeared. "Also, you'll pay Madison's tuition $6,000 by Friday." I typed back, "No chance," before I could think. His response came instantly, "Then get out. You're cut off." I stared at my phone screen, watching those cruel words blur through tears I refused to let fall. This wasn't the first time Dad had chosen Madison over me, but demanding $6,000 on my birthday felt like a new low. I tried to return to my marketing presentation for Henderson and Associates, but concentration was impossible. Every keystroke reminded me that my laptop, the one I'd saved for months to buy, was gone. The drive home from downtown Chicago felt endless traffic crawling along Lakeshore Drive while my mind raced through 28 years of being second best. Madison had always been the golden child, despite being 3 years younger and completely unemployed. While I worked 3 jobs to pay for the community college, she got a full ride to Northwestern because Dad convinced them she was a underprivileged scholarship candidate. The lies he told on her behalf still amazed me. I remembered her sweet 16 party where Dad rented the country club ballroom and hired a DJ. Madison wore a custom pink dress that cost more than my monthly salary at the diner where I worked weekends. She got a brand new Honda Civic with leather seats and a sunroof. When my 16th birthday came around 3 months later, I got grocery store cake and a $25 gift card to Target. Mom said they'd spent too much on Madison's party and needed to be practical. Madison's college years were even worse. Dad paid for her sorority dues, spring break trips to Cabo, summer internships in Los Angeles that were basically paid vacations. She majored in art therapy, changed to communications, then switched to creative writing before settling on general studies. 5 years of college and she graduated with no job prospects and no ambition beyond posting Instagram stories about brunch dates and shopping hauls. Meanwhile, I'd clawed my way through Harper College while working at Murphy's Diner on weekends and tutoring high school kids 3 nights a week. I saved every penny for textbook supplies and eventually my laptop. That computer represented freedom. The ability to freelance graphic design work from my bedroom and build something of my own. 4 years of late nights creating logos, websites, and marketing materials for small businesses had built my reputation and my savings account. I pulled into our driveway in Arlington Heights, seeing Madison's white Honda parked sideways across 2 spaces like she owned the place. Her Instagram story was already updated with photos of her new iPhone showing it off to friends at Starbucks. The caption read, "Birthday gifts keep coming. Dad says family takes care of family." She'd tagged our location and added heart emojis as if she'd earned anything in her 25 years of existence. Walking through the front door, I found Madison in the living room, FaceTiming with her boyfriend Tyler while showing off her new phone. She was wearing designer jeans I'd never seen before and a Coach purse that cost more than my monthly car payment. Her fingernails were freshly manicured in some elaborate design with tiny gems that probably cost $50. "Oh my God, Tyler, look at the camera quality," she squealed, completely ignoring me as I stood in the doorway. "Dad surprised me today because he's the absolute best. He said I deserved something special for being such a good daughter." The irony hit me like a physical blow. Madison had never held a job, never paid a bill, never sacrificed anything for anyone. Yet somehow she deserved special treatment, while I deserved to have my property stolen and sold without permission. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, each step heavier than the last, knowing I'd find evidence of their violation waiting for me. My room looked like a tornado had hit it. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered across the floor, my desk chair overturned. They'd ransacked everything looking for my laptop, not caring about the damage they caused. My backup external drive was missing too, along with my portfolio folder and client contact information. Years of work gone in one afternoon while I was trying to build a career and make something of myself. I sat on my bed, surrounded by the chaos, and finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding for years. This wasn't love. This wasn't family. This was exploitation disguised as obligation, and I'd been enabling it by accepting their treatment as normal. Madison got everything she wanted because she demanded it. I got nothing because I never complained. The golden child dynamic wasn't accidental. It was carefully constructed to keep me grateful for scraps, while she feasted on abundance. The sound of Dad's heavy footsteps on the stairs told me the confrontation I'd been dreading was about to begin. He appeared in my doorway, filling the frame with his bulk, wearing the same smug expression he'd worn since childhood, whenever he was about to lecture me about gratitude and responsibility. Mom followed behind him, twisting her wedding ring, nervously, a habit she'd developed whenever family drama erupted. "We need to talk," Dad announced, settling into my desk chair like he was conducting a business meeting. "Madison's tuition payment is due Friday and you're going to cover it. $6,000. I looked up from the scattered remains of my room, fighting to keep my voice steady. Tuition for what Madison graduated 2 years ago. "Graduate school?" Mom interjected quickly, avoiding eye contact. "She's pursuing her master's degree in fine arts. Portland Art Institute accepted her for their accelerated program." Something about Mom's nervous tone triggered my suspicion. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling through months of transactions while they watched. What I found made my stomach drop. Automatic payments for Commonwealth Edison totaling $147 monthly. ComEd bills I thought were Mom and Dad's responsibility. Then I saw the Nicor gas payments, $86 every month, automatically deducted from my checking account. "Wait," I said, scrolling faster. "I've been paying the gas and electric bills." "Temporarily," Dad said dismissively, "just until I found steady work again." But the payments went back 18 months. I kept scrolling, finding AT&T payments for the family plan, Netflix, and Hulu subscriptions, even Madison's car insurance. $193 monthly for full coverage on a car I'd never driven. The grocery store charges made me sick. Jewel, Osco, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's. I'd been covering family groceries for over 2 years, thinking I was just helping with occasional expenses. "This isn't temporary," I whispered, adding up the numbers in my head. "I've paid almost $1,500 just in the last 3 months." "Or family helps family." Mom repeated her favorite phrase whenever they needed money. "We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. Now it's your turn to contribute." I scrolled back further, finding patterns I'd somehow missed while living them. Auto insurance payments that weren't mine, internet bills, even mortgage payments listed as household contribution that I'd approved without questioning. The total was staggering, over $40,000 in 3 years. Money I'd earned through late-night design projects, weekend diner shifts, and tutoring sessions with suburban teenagers who complained about geometry homework. "Madison's car payment," I said, finding the Honda financing charge. $238 monthly for a car I've never driven. "She needed reliable transportation for job interviews," Dad explained, but his voice lacked conviction. "What job interviews? She posts Instagram stories from coffee shops and nail salons all day." Madison's laugh drifted up from the living room, followed by Tyler's voice on speakerphone discussing dinner plans at some expensive restaurant in Lincoln Park. She was planning to spend more on one meal than I typically budgeted for groceries in a week. The casual entitlement in her voice made my hands clench around my phone. "The Art Institute costs $30,000 per year." Mom continued, pressing forward with their rehearsed explanation. $6,000 is just your share of the tuition. We're covering the rest." "My share?" The words came out sharper than intended. "Why do I have a share of Madison's education?" "Because successful people help their family succeed." Dad said, leaning forward with the condescending tone he'd used since I was 12. Your graphic design business is doing well. You can afford to invest in your sister's future. I thought about my successful business. Late nights creating logos for auto repair shops, designing flyers for local restaurants, building websites for small businesses that paid me in installments. Every project was a struggle to collect payment. Every client was a negotiation to prove my worth. I loved the creative work, but success felt generous when I was barely covering my own expenses after supporting their household. What happens if I say no? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Then you're not the daughter we raised, Mom said softly, deploying emotional manipulation like a precision weapon. We sacrificed everything for you girls. Dad worked double shifts at the factory until his back gave out. I cleaned houses until my arthritis got too bad. We went without so you could have opportunities. The revisionist history stung because it contained just enough truth to be believable. Dad had worked factory jobs, but he'd also spent years collecting unemployment while working under-the-table construction gigs. Mom's house cleaning business lasted 6 months before she decided it was too demanding. They'd made sacrifices, but they'd also made choices that prioritized Madison's comfort over financial responsibility. I need time to think about this, I said, hoping to end the conversation before it escalated further. There's nothing to think about, Dad replied, standing up with an air of finality. Family loyalty isn't optional. Madison's payment is due Friday. You'll figure out how to make it work just like you always do. They left me alone with my demolished room and my phone full of financial evidence. Madison's laughter continued from downstairs, punctuated by discussions about weekend plans and shopping trips. She was planning her future with my money-making arrangements that assumed my support was guaranteed and unlimited. I calculated my checking account balance against their demands. $6,000 would wipe out most of my emergency fund money I'd saved for apartment deposits, car repairs, or medical emergencies. Money I'd earned by saying yes to every freelance project, no matter how demanding or poorly paid. Money that represented security and independence they were asking me to sacrifice for Madison's artistic dreams in Portland. The laptop sale suddenly made perfect sense. They needed cash immediately to maintain the illusion that they could afford Madison's lifestyle. My computer was collateral damage in their desperate attempt to keep their golden child happy and comfortable. They'd stolen my tools, my work, and my financial independence in one afternoon, then demanded I thank them for the privilege of supporting them. Rage propelled me off the bed and toward my closet, where I started throwing clothes into my old college duffel bag. If they wanted me gone, I'd leave on my own terms. But first, I needed to salvage what remained of my personal belongings before they decided to sell anything else that might benefit Madison's endless needs. I knelt beside my bed, remembering the loose floorboard where I'd hidden my diary during high school. My fingers found the familiar groove prying up the board that had concealed my teenage secrets from Mom's periodic room searches. But instead of empty space, I felt something hard and metallic. A small fireproof box I'd forgotten about hidden there 5 years ago during the chaos of Grandma Rose's funeral. The box was heavier than I remembered, secured with a combination lock that took me 3 tries to open. Inside, underneath a layer of tissue paper, I found documents that made my hands shake as I read them. Grandma Rose's will clearly stating that the house at 1247 Maple Street in Arlington Heights was left exclusively to me, her granddaughter, Karen Elizabeth Walsh, in recognition of my work ethic and determination to build an independent life. But there was more. A handwritten letter in Grandma's precise cursive dated just 2 months before her death, explaining her decision in painful detail. She'd watched my parents favor Madison for years, noticed how they took my contributions for granted while celebrating Madison's smallest achievements. She'd seen me working multiple jobs while Madison received gift after gift without gratitude or effort. Corinne. The letter read, You are the only one in this family who understands the value of work and sacrifice. I'm leaving you the house because you'll appreciate what it represents. Security earned through dedication, not entitlement. Your parents have grown comfortable depending on your generosity, but you deserve a foundation of your own. The letter continued with details that made my chest tighten. Grandma had established a trust fund containing $25,000, intended to help me start my adult life without family financial pressure. The money was held at First National Bank of Arlington Heights, accessible on my 25th birthday. That was 3 years ago. I'd never received a penny or even knew the fund existed. Attached to the letter were bank statements showing regular withdrawals from my trust fund over the past 3 years. Dad's name appeared as the authorized trustee with power of attorney documents that looked suspiciously different from Grandma's usual signature. The money had been transferred into an account listed under Family Emergency Fund, which seemed to pay for Madison's car, her college expenses, and various other luxuries I'd been watching them afford on mysterious income sources. I read the house deed 3 times, checking and rechecking the legal language. The property was mine, worth approximately $400,000, according to the most recent tax assessment. Yet, I'd been paying them rent from my childhood bedroom, contributing to mortgage payments on a house I legally owned, covering utilities and maintenance for property that belonged to me. The scope of their deception was breathtaking. Not only had they hidden my inheritance, but they'd been charging me to live in my own house while stealing money Grandma had specifically left for my independence. Every guilt trip about family loyalty, every demand for financial contribution, every lecture about gratitude had been delivered while they systematically robbed me of the security my grandmother had tried to provide. Madison's voice carried up the stairs, discussing apartment hunting in Portland with Tyler. She was planning to use the $6,000 they demanded from me to cover deposits and first month's rent for some trendy loft in the Pearl District. She talked about the neighborhood like she'd researched it carefully, mentioning specific coffee shops and art galleries she wanted to explore with my stolen inheritance money. I photographed every document in the box, with my phone saving them to cloud storage where my parents couldn't access or delete them. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to verify the current legal status before confronting them with what I'd discovered. If they'd been forging documents and stealing inheritance money, this went beyond family manipulation into criminal fraud territory. The house deed was dated and notarized, correctly filed with Cook County 2 months after Grandma's death. My name appeared as sole owner with no mention of my parents or Madison having any legal claim to the property. They'd been living in my house, collecting rent from my bedroom, and demanding I contribute to mortgage payments on property they didn't own. I thought about every argument we'd had about my financial contributions, every guilt trip about family responsibility, every demand for gratitude because they provided shelter. They'd been manipulating me into paying for my own house while stealing money my grandmother had left specifically to prevent this kind of exploitation. The cruelty was so calculated it took my breath away. The trust fund statements showed the last withdrawal had been made just 2 weeks ago, coinciding with Madison's sudden need for new clothes and another expensive trip to Door County with her college friends. They'd been using my inheritance money to fund her lifestyle while demanding I sacrifice my emergency savings for her graduate school fantasies. Every dollar they'd stolen represented hours of my labor, late nights at the diner weekend, tutoring sessions, freelance projects that kept me working until 2 in the morning. I carefully placed all the documents back in the box, securing it in my duffel bag along with enough clothes for several days. Whatever confrontation was coming, I needed legal advice and time to process what I'd learned. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Dad says you're being dramatic about the laptop. It's just stuff. Family is more important than material things." The hypocrisy was stunning. Madison, who'd never owned anything she'd actually paid for, lecturing me about materialism while planning to spend $6,000 of my money on an apartment in Portland. She treated my laptop like disposable property while obsessing over her new iPhone as if technology only mattered when it belonged to her. My phone erupted with calls from an unknown Seattle number just as I finished packing. The third call finally broke through my shock, and I answered to hear Janet Morrison's frantic voice from TechStart Solutions, the startup client I'd been building a complete brand identity for over the past 6 months. "Corinne, thank God you answered." Janet said, her usually calm tone edged with panic. "We've been trying to reach you all day. The presentation files you sent last week won't open, and our investor meeting is tomorrow morning at 9. We need the final campaign designs uploaded to the presentation platform by midnight tonight, or we lose our Series A funding opportunity." My blood turned to ice as the implications hit me. The TechStart project wasn't just another freelance job. It was my breakthrough client, a legitimate startup with venture capital backing and a $50,000 contract for complete brand development. 6 months of work, including logo concepts, website mockups, social media templates, and investor presentation designs, all stored on the laptop Dad had sold for a fraction of what Madison's phone cost. "Janet, I need to tell you something terrible." I began trying to keep my voice steady while my career imploded in real time. My laptop was stolen today, and all the native files were on the hard drive. The silence on the other end lasted forever. I could hear voices in the background, probably TechStart's founders realizing their company might fail because my family had betrayed me at the worst possible moment. "Stolen." Janet's voice cracked. "Corinne, those files represent our entire brand identity. We've already printed business cards, ordered promotional materials, designed the website around your concepts. Our potential investors are expecting to see a cohesive presentation that justifies our marketing budget allocation." I explained what had happened as quickly as possible, watching Madison through my bedroom window as she posed for selfies with her new phone in our backyard. She was probably posting about her perfect life while my professional reputation crumbled because her phone was more important than my work. "I have some backup files on cloud storage," I said desperately, but the high-resolution logo files and the interactive presentation mockups were all saved locally. I was planning to upload everything tonight after final revisions. Corinne, I need you to understand what's at stake here," Janet said carefully. "TechStart has been operating on bridge funding for 8 months. If we don't close this Series A round tomorrow, the company folds. 47 employees lose their jobs. My co-founders and I lose our houses. This isn't just about your freelance contract anymore." The weight of responsibility crushed down on me. Janet had taken a chance hiring an independent designer instead of a big agency specifically because she believed in supporting small businesses and emerging talent. I'd promised her work that could compete with top-tier design firms at a fraction of the cost. Now her faith in me was about to destroy her company. "I'm going to get your laptop back," I promised, though I had no idea how. "Give me until 10 tonight. I'll find a way to recover the files and get everything uploaded." Karen, I hope you understand that if those files aren't recovered, TechStart will have to pursue legal action for the breach of contract, Janet said reluctantly. "Our lawyers say we can claim damages for the failed funding round, lost business opportunities, and employee severance costs. We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in liability." My career in graphic design could end before it really began. 6 years of building client relationships, developing skills, and establishing credibility would evaporate because my family decided Madison's convenience mattered more than my professional obligations. I'd be financially ruined and professionally blacklisted while she posted Instagram stories about her exciting move to Portland. I called Dad immediately, not caring about the consequences of my anger anymore. "Where did you sell my laptop?" I demanded when he answered. "Cash America on Rand Road," he replied casually, as if discussing the weather. "Got $300 for it. Not bad for an old computer." $300. He destroyed my career and potentially exposed me to massive legal liability for $300, approximately half what Madison's phone had cost. The laptop was worth $2,000 new, but its value to my work was immeasurable. 6 months of client projects, design templates, software licenses, contact databases, irreplaceable professional assets sold for beer money. That laptop had client work worth $50,000. I said, struggling to maintain composure. You might have just cost me my entire business. It's just a computer, he replied with the same dismissive tone he'd used my entire life. You can get another one. Madison needed the phone for job interviews. What job interviews? I shouted, abandoning any pretense of calm. She posts Instagram stories from Starbucks all day. Don't you dare criticize your sister, Dad snapped back. Madison is pursuing her artistic dreams. Not everyone needs to be obsessed with money like you are. I hung up and immediately drove to Cash America, hoping against hope that the laptop was still available. The pawn shop owner, a tired-looking man in his 60s, shook his head when I described the computer and offered to buy it back for $500. Sold it 2 hours ago, he said apologetically. Nice young couple cash sale. They seemed excited about getting a deal on a professional laptop. This is an emergency, I pleaded. That computer has critical work files. Can you contact them? Store policy doesn't allow sharing customer information, he replied. Privacy laws and all that. Sorry, but once something's sold, it's gone. I drove to 3 other pawn shops in the area, desperate to find someone willing to help track down my laptop. Each owner gave me the same response. Customer privacy prevented them from sharing purchase information even in emergency situations. My professional life was dissolving while Madison enjoyed her new phone and planned her Portland adventure. Back home, Madison was in the kitchen making herself an elaborate smoothie with ingredients that probably cost more than my last grocery budget. She looked up cheerfully when I walked in, completely oblivious to the destruction her new phone had caused. "How's your little work crisis going?" she asked, adding organic blueberries to her mixture. "Dad says you're being overdramatic about the computer thing." "Madison, that laptop contained client work worth more than you've ever earned in your entire life," I said quietly. "If I can't recover those files, I could be sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars." She shrugged, focusing on her smoothie preparation. "You'll figure it out. You always do. Besides, it's just work stuff. There are more important things in life than money and career obsession." I stared at her, watching her blend $50 worth of organic ingredients, while lecturing me about the unimportance of work. She'd never held a job, never felt the pressure of deadlines or client expectations, never experienced the terror of potential professional failure. Yet she felt qualified to minimize the destruction her phone had caused to my livelihood. My phone buzzed with another call from Janet. The investor presentation was in less than 18 hours, and TechStart's future hung in the balance, while Madison enjoyed her birthday smoothie, completely insulated from the consequences of her family's choices. The panic in Janet's voice when she called again at 8:30 that evening crystallized my desperation into action. I had 90 minutes to perform a miracle, and my only lead was tracking down Madison's supposed tuition payment. If she was really enrolled at Portland Art Institute, maybe I could negotiate a payment extension while I recovered my files. At minimum, I needed to understand why $6,000 was due with such urgency when most schools offered payment plan options. I called Portland Art Institute's admissions office expecting to reach voicemail after business hours. Instead, a helpful student worker named Kevin answered, explaining they maintained extended phone hours during enrollment periods to accommodate working students and family members calling from different time zones. "I'm trying to verify my sister's enrollment and payment status," I explained, giving him Madison's full name and birth date. Madison Claire Walsh. There's some confusion about tuition payment deadlines. Kevin asked me to hold while he accessed student records. The wait felt eternal, with Janet's deadline looming and my career hanging in the balance. Finally, he returned with information that made my knees buckle. "I'm sorry, but we don't have any student enrolled under that name," Kevin said carefully. "We did have a Madison Walsh who completed our application process last fall, but she withdrew her enrollment in February after failing to attend classes for 6 consecutive weeks." "By withdrew," I repeated stupidly. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. She received a full refund of her spring semester tuition payment minus a small administrative fee. The refund check for $12,047 was processed on February 28th. $12,000. Madison had received $12,000 in refund money 3 months ago and never told our parents. The $6,000 they were demanding from me was completely fabricated, designed to fund whatever expensive plan she'd made with her secret windfall. "Can you tell me anything about her attendance record?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "She attended orientation week in January, but never showed up for regular classes," Kevin explained. "Her professors reported her as a no-show after the ad drop deadline. The withdrawal was processed automatically when she failed to respond to academic probation notices." I thanked Kevin and immediately tried calling Madison, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Her Instagram story showed her at some upscale restaurant in Schaumburg, sharing appetizers and wine with Tyler while celebrating her new phone. The timestamp indicated she'd posted the videos 20 minutes ago, probably while I was discovering her lies about school enrollment. Madison had been lying to everyone for 3 months, pretending to attend graduate school while actually living off her tuition refund money. Every morning, when she'd left the house with her backpack and laptop claiming to have classes or study groups, she'd been spending refund money on shopping trips, restaurant meals, and recreational activities with friends who thought she was a dedicated graduate student. The elaborate deception required constant maintenance. She'd created fake schedules, invented professors' names, complained about difficult assignments that never existed. She'd even shown mom and dad grade reports she'd clearly fabricated, earning praise for academic excellence in courses she'd never attended. The performance was so convincing that they genuinely believed she was succeeding in graduate school. But Madison's lies went deeper than academic fraud. I scrolled through her Instagram posts from the past 3 months, noticing expensive purchases that should have been impossible on a student budget. Designer handbags, regular spa appointments, weekend trips to Wisconsin Dells, and Lake Geneva dinners at restaurants that charge $40 for entrees. She'd been funding a lifestyle of leisure and luxury while everyone believed she was focused on her education. The $6,000 tuition demand was her way of extending the deception while funding whatever new scheme she'd developed. Based on her Instagram stories about Portland apartment hunting, she was planning to use my money to relocate somewhere she could start fresh without the burden of explaining her fake graduate school career. I called Tyler directly, knowing Madison would answer his phone even if she was avoiding mine. "Hey, Corinne," Madison said sweetly when she picked up. "What's going on? We're having dinner, so make it quick." "I just talked to Portland Art Institute," I said without preamble. "They told me you withdrew in February and got a $12,000 refund." The silence lasted long enough for Tyler to ask if everything was okay in the background. Madison's voice changed completely when she finally responded, dropping the innocent act for cold calculation. So," she said simply, "what's your point?" "My point is that you've been lying to everyone for 3 months while planning to steal $6,000 from me for fake tuition." "I prefer to think of it as creative financing," Madison replied with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "Mom and Dad are too stupid to check enrollment records, and you've always been the family ATM anyway. It's not like you were going to miss the money." The casual cruelty in her voice revealed everything I'd been too naive to see. Madison didn't view me as her sister or even as a person with my own needs and goals. I was a resource to be exploited, a reliable source of funding for whatever lifestyle she wanted to maintain. My career crisis, my financial stress, my professional obligations, none of it mattered compared to her convenience and comfort. Where did the $12,000 go? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Oh, living expenses, she said cheerfully. Rent, food, entertainment, shopping. Tyler and I took a cruise to the Bahamas in March. I bought a new wardrobe for spring, got my car detailed and the interior reupholstered. You know, normal stuff. Normal stuff. Madison had spent $12,000 in 3 months on luxury purchases and vacation travel, while I worked 60-hour weeks to cover family expenses I didn't know I was paying. She'd blown through money intended for education while planning to scam more cash from me to fund her relocation to Portland. What's the $6,000 really for? I demanded. Moving expenses, she admitted without shame. Apartment deposit, first month's rent, travel costs, new furniture. Portland's expensive and Tyler got accepted to law school at Lewis and Clark. We need startup money for our new life together. Using money you're stealing from me. Using money that's available because you're successful and I'm not, she corrected. It's not stealing when it's family wealth redistribution. Besides, you'll make the money back with your little graphic design business. I don't have any other income options. The entitlement was breathtaking. Madison had convinced herself that my financial success obligated me to fund her lifestyle regardless of how the money was obtained or what sacrifices I'd made to earn it. She viewed my work as a family resource rather than my personal achievement available for her use whenever she needed financial support for her latest scheme. Madison, my client could sue me for hundreds of thousands of dollars because Dad sold my laptop to buy your phone. I explained desperately. If I can't recover those work files, I could lose everything. That sounds like a you problem, she replied dismissively. Maybe you should have been more careful about backing up important stuff. Besides, Dad needed the laptop money to prove he could provide for his daughters. It's not like he had a choice. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone while my professional deadline approached and my family celebrated their successful exploitation of my resources. Madison and Tyler were probably toasting their Portland adventure with wine I'd inadvertently paid for, while Janet waited for work files I couldn't access because my tools had been sold to fund Madison's phone upgrade. I had 47 minutes until Janet's deadline, no laptop, no backup files, and a sister who viewed my potential financial ruin as an acceptable cost for her convenience. The family I'd been supporting for years had systematically deceived me while planning to drain my resources for Madison's benefit, then blamed me for being insufficiently grateful for their manipulation. With 35 minutes until Janet's deadline and no viable way to recover my work files, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 hours earlier. I called her back and explained that I couldn't deliver the project as promised, accepting full responsibility while acknowledging the legal and financial consequences that would follow. Janet's disappointment was palpable, but her professionalism remained intact even as her company faced potential failure because of my family's betrayal. We scheduled a call for the following morning to discuss damage control options and legal implications. TechStart would have to tell their investors that their brand identity was incomplete, hoping for an extension that might not come. With my career crisis temporarily stabilized at the worst possible outcome, I turned my attention to the inheritance documents that had revealed the scope of my parents' deception. If they'd been stealing my inheritance money and lying about property ownership, I needed to understand what other financial crimes they might have committed using my identity. I spent the next 2 hours on my laptop researching my own credit report and financial history, discovering a trail of fraud that made the laptop theft seem minor by comparison. My social security number had been used to open 3 credit card accounts I'd never authorized, accumulating over $15,000 in debt that was damaging my credit score every month. The cards were linked to addresses I'd never lived at with purchases at stores I'd never visited. The credit applications were sophisticated fraud using my employment information and income details they'd obtained through my tax documents that I'd foolishly stored in the family filing cabinet. They'd applied for cards during busy periods when I was too distracted with work deadlines to monitor my credit, regularly ensuring the accounts were well established before I discovered them. But the credit fraud was only the beginning. My parents had been claiming me as a dependent on their tax returns for the past 3 years, despite the fact that I'd been living independently and filing my own returns. The double filing had triggered automatic refunds to their account, while my legitimate refunds were delayed by IRS investigations into the conflicting claims. Dad's unemployment benefits raised more red flags when I researched Illinois Department of Employment Security records. He'd been collecting benefits for 18 months while simultaneously working cash construction jobs with his friend Larry Murphy. The construction work was deliberately unreported, allowing him to maintain unemployment eligibility while earning additional income that funded Madison's lifestyle and their household expenses. Mom's disability claims revealed another layer of deception. She'd been receiving Social Security disability payments for fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome conditions that prevented her from maintaining employment, according to her medical documentation. Yet her Instagram posts showed regular activities incompatible with disabling chronic pain. Hiking trips, yoga classes, weekend shopping excursions that lasted for hours. The medical fraud was particularly sophisticated because fibromyalgia symptoms are largely subjective, making them difficult for doctors to verify or dispute. Mom had learned to present her symptoms convincingly during medical appointments while maintaining an active lifestyle that contradicted her disability claims. The monthly payments supplemented their household income while I unknowingly covered most of their actual expenses. Their financial crimes weren't impulsive decisions or temporary desperate measures. They represented a systematic approach to exploiting government programs, family members, and legal systems for their benefit. Every fraudulent claim, every stolen identity, every false tax filing was carefully planned to maximize their income while minimizing their legal exposure. I discovered that they'd even been using my identity to secure utility services when their own credit became too damaged for approval. My name appeared on electric, gas, and internet accounts for addresses where I'd never lived, creating financial obligations that could become my responsibility if they defaulted on payments. The scope of their financial crimes was overwhelming, involving federal agencies, state departments, credit institutions, and private companies. They'd built an entire lifestyle on fraudulent foundations, using my identity and inheritance to fund luxuries they couldn't afford through legitimate means. Madison's education fraud now seemed like a family tradition rather than an isolated incident. She'd learned from parents who viewed deception as a viable financial strategy, applying their methods to her own schemes with confidence that consequences were unlikely. The fake graduate school enrollment was her version of Dad's unemployment fraud and Mom's disability claims. Most disturbing was the realization that their crimes were escalating in both scope and boldness. Earlier fraudulent activities involved smaller amounts and government programs with limited investigation resources. But stealing inheritance money and using my identity for major credit accounts represented significantly more serious felonies with federal jurisdiction and severe criminal penalties. Their financial house of cards was becoming unsustainable as their schemes required increasingly complex maintenance and larger sums to fund Madison's growing expectations. My laptop sale wasn't about Madison's phone. It was about generating immediate cash to cover obligations they couldn't meet through legitimate income or existing fraud schemes. I photographed every document I discovered, saving evidence to multiple cloud storage accounts where my parents couldn't access or delete it. The documentation clearly established patterns of financial crime spanning multiple years and involving numerous victims, from government agencies to family members to financial institutions. The inheritance theft alone represented grand larceny charges in Illinois, but the identity theft and federal tax fraud carried much more serious penalties. If prosecuted fully, My parents could face years in federal prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution obligations that would financially ruin them permanently. Yet, they'd been escalating their demands on me even as their criminal liability grew more serious. The $6,000 tuition payment they demanded would have funded Madison's relocation, while further deepening their dependence on my financial support and my unwitting participation in their fraudulent lifestyle. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Madison says you're causing problems about her tuition payment. Family meeting tomorrow morning at 9. We need to get this straightened out before Friday." They were planning to corner me with coordinated pressure, probably armed with more guilt trips and manipulation tactics designed to extract the money they needed. But this time, I'd be attending their family meeting with evidence of their financial crimes and legal documentation, proving their systematic exploitation of my resources and identity. The balance of power was about to shift dramatically, and they had no idea what I discovered in the past few hours. I arrived at the family meeting armed with printed documents, legal evidence, and a calm determination that surprised me with its steadiness. Dad had arranged the living room like a tribunal, positioning himself in his recliner with Mom and Madison flanking him on the couch. Their coordinated seating arrangement and serious expressions indicated they'd planned this confrontation carefully, probably rehearsing arguments and strategies to pressure me into compliance. "Sit down, Corinne," Dad commanded, gesturing toward the wooden chair they'd pulled from the dining room. The hard, uncomfortable seat faced their comfortable positions, a deliberate power dynamic designed to make me feel defensive and isolated. "We need to talk about your attitude and your responsibilities to this family." I remained standing, placing my folder of documents on the coffee table between us. "Actually, I think we need to talk about your criminal activities and theft of my inheritance." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Madison's confident smirk faltered as she glanced nervously between our parents, clearly unprepared for this direction. Mom's hand went to her throat, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood when she'd been caught in lies about spending money or forgetting important commitments. "Criminal activities," Dad repeated with forced laughter. "You're being dramatic again, Corinne. Just because you're upset about Madison's tuition doesn't mean you can start throwing around serious accusations." I opened the folder and placed Grandma Rose's will on the coffee table, watching their faces as they recognized the document they'd hidden from me for 5 years. "This house belongs to me. Grandmother left it to me specifically along with a $25,000 trust fund that you've been stealing from for 3 years." "Those documents are old," Mom interjected quickly. Grandma was confused at the end. She didn't understand the legal implications of what she was signing. "The will is legally valid and properly notarized," I replied calmly. "But even if it wasn't, your theft of trust fund money and use of my identity for credit fraud are federal crimes regardless of property ownership." Madison shifted uncomfortably as I placed credit card statements on the table showing the accounts opened in my name without authorization. Her Instagram lifestyle suddenly made sense. She'd been funding her luxury purchases with credit cards her parents had fraudulently obtained using my personal information. "We needed those cards for emergency expenses," Dad explained defensively. "You weren't using your credit anyway, and family helps family during difficult times." Emergency expenses like Madison's cruise to the Bahamas. I asked, placing her social media photos beside the credit statements. Or her car interior reupholstering. Madison spent $12,000 in 3 months, while you accumulated $15,000 in fraudulent debt using my identity. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Photographs, bank statements, credit reports, social media posts, and legal documents created an irrefutable timeline of systematic financial abuse and criminal fraud. Their shocked expressions revealed they'd never expected me to investigate their activities or discover the scope of their deception. "Madison told us she was still in school," Mom said weakly, her voice lacking conviction. "We thought the tuition payment was legitimate." Madison dropped out in February and received a $12,000 refund that she spent on luxury purchases. I replied, placing the Portland Art Institute correspondence on the table. The $6,000 you're demanding from me is for moving expenses so she can start a new life in Portland without working or facing consequences for her lies. Madison finally spoke up, her voice shrill with defensive anger. You have no right to investigate my personal business. Just because you're obsessed with money doesn't mean you can spy on your own family. You made it my business when you planned to steal $6,000 from me, I answered calmly. And you made it criminal when you participated in identity theft and fraud schemes that could send all of you to federal prison. Dad stood up abruptly, his face flushed with rage and panic. You're not calling the police or lawyers or anyone else. This is family business and we'll handle it within the family. If you cause problems for us, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Aya, are you threatening me? I asked, pulling out my phone to start recording. Please continue making threats while I document them for the police report I'm filing tomorrow morning. The recording function seemed to drain the fight out of them as they realized their words could be used as evidence in criminal proceedings. Dad sat back down heavily, running his hands through his hair while Mom began crying quietly into her hands. We never meant for it to go this far, Mom whispered between sobs. Everything just got so expensive and Madison needed so many things, and you were doing so well with your business. So you decided to steal from me instead of getting jobs or reducing Madison's expenses. I finished. You chose to commit federal crimes rather than ask Madison to work or live within your legitimate income. Madison's anger exploded in a way I'd never seen before. This is all about jealousy. You can't stand that Mom and Dad love me more than you. You've always been bitter and resentful because I'm prettier and more successful and get more attention. More successful, I repeated incredulously. Madison, you've never held a job, never earned $1, never accomplished anything without other people's money. Your entire lifestyle is funded through theft and fraud. I'm pursuing my artistic dreams, she screamed. Not everyone needs to be a boring workaholic like you. Some people have creativity and vision and bigger goals than just making money. The delusion was staggering. Madison genuinely believed that her unemployment and financial dependence represented artistic pursuit and creative vision. She'd convinced herself that work was beneath her, while simultaneously stealing from family members to fund her lifestyle of leisure and consumption. Your artistic dreams include identity theft and federal fraud, I pointed out. Those credit cards in my name paid for your creative pursuits. Your vision includes destroying my credit score and potentially sending your parents to prison. Dad tried to regain control of the conversation by returning to familiar manipulation tactics. If you report us to authorities, you'll destroy this family forever. Madison will have a criminal record that ruins her future. Your mother could go to prison for medical fraud. I'll lose my benefits and probably end up homeless. You should have considered those consequences before committing the crimes, I replied. Your choices created this situation, not my discovery of your activities. We can fix this, Mom pleaded desperately. We'll pay back the money and close the credit accounts and start over with honest jobs. Just give us a chance to make things right. But their promises felt hollow after years of escalating deception and exploitation. They'd had countless opportunities to choose honesty and legitimate work over fraud and theft. Instead, they deepened their criminal activities while increasing their demands on my resources and patience. The family meeting they'd planned to pressure me into compliance had become their confession of systematic financial crimes and criminal conspiracy. Their confident manipulation had crumbled into desperate damage control as evidence of their activities destroyed any remaining credibility or moral authority they thought they possessed. Dad's desperate promises and Mom's theatrical crying couldn't disguise the fact that their panic was escalating as they realized how thoroughly I documented their criminal activities. Madison sat in stunned silence, probably calculating how her Portland plans would be affected by potential criminal charges and loss of family funding. We can work together to fix this, Dad repeated his voice, taking on the wheedling tone he used when traditional authority hadn't achieved compliance. No lawyers, no police, just family solving family problems like we always have. Like you always have, I asked, maintaining my calm demeanor while their composure disintegrated. You mean like when you solved Madison's education expenses by stealing my inheritance money? Or when you solved utility bills by using my identity for fraudulent accounts? I reached for my phone and showed them photographs I'd taken of additional documents they hadn't seen yet. Bank statements proving they'd been depositing my family support money into secret accounts while claiming financial hardship. Tax documents showing they'd been filing fraudulent returns claiming me as a dependent while I maintained independent residence and income. You've been planning to drain my resources systematically while building criminal liability that could destroy all of us, I continued. But I've been planning too, and my plans don't require committing federal crimes or exploiting family members. Madison's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What kind of planning? The kind of planning someone does when they realize their family views them as an ATM rather than a person, I replied. I've been consulting with attorneys documenting financial abuse and preparing for exactly this conversation. Their faces went pale as they processed the implications. I hadn't stumbled into this confrontation unprepared or emotional. I'd been building a legal case while they'd been escalating their criminal activities and financial demands. My attorney is Andrea Chen from Morrison & Associates. I continued watching Dad's face as he recognized the name of Chicago's most aggressive white-collar crime defense firm. She's been helping me document your activities for the past 4 months, ever since I noticed irregular charges on my credit report. This was partially true. I'd been researching attorneys and had scheduled a consultation for next week. But the strategic advantage of making them believe I had established legal representation was worth the exaggeration. 4 months. Mom whispered, her crying stopping abruptly as she realized the timeline implications. 4 months of documenting fraudulent transactions, recording conversations, and building evidence for both criminal prosecution and civil recovery. I confirmed. Andrea specializes in family financial abuse cases, and she says your activities represent one of the most comprehensive exploitation schemes she's encountered. Madison's voice cracked with panic. You've been recording our conversations. Illinois is a one-party consent state for audio recording, I explained. Every conversation where you discussed using my credit card, spending my inheritance money, or planning to extract tuition payments for fake school enrollment has been legally documented and stored with my attorney. Dad's authoritative facade completely collapsed as he realized their casual admissions of criminal activity had been preserved as evidence for potential prosecution. His threats and manipulation tactics had been recorded along with detailed confessions of identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. My boss at Henderson & Associates is also aware of the situation. I added, delivering information that made their panic visible. When you threatened to call my workplace and expose my ungrateful attitude, I preemptively explained the family situation to human resources and my supervisor. You told your boss about family problems, Mom asked incredulously, as if professional disclosure was more shocking than criminal fraud. I told my boss that family members were engaging in identity theft and workplace harassment, and that I'd been the victim of financial abuse disguised as family obligations. I corrected. Henderson & Associates has excellent legal resources for employees facing identity theft, and they're very protective of staff members who are targeted for workplace harassment. This revelation seemed to hit Dad particularly hard as he realized his threats against my employment had backfired spectacularly. Instead of gaining leverage over me, he'd triggered corporate protective measures that could involve additional legal complications for him. My new apartment lease begins Monday. I continued providing information that shifted the power dynamic even further. I've already arranged utility transfers, changed my banking to accounts you can't access, and notified all relevant institutions about potential identity theft using my social security number. Madison's composure finally cracked completely. New apartment, you're really leaving. I'm really stopping my financial support of criminal activities, I clarified. The house utilities, insurance, and mortgage payments I've been covering will become your responsibility starting next week. Since I legally own the house, you'll also need to start paying me rent if you want to continue living here. The financial implications hit them like a physical blow. Without my unknowing subsidies, their household expenses would exceed their legitimate income by thousands of dollars monthly. They'd have to choose between maintaining their current lifestyle and avoiding bankruptcy while simultaneously dealing with potential criminal charges. We can't afford the house payments without your help, Dad admitted, his voice hollow with defeat. Then you'll need to get legitimate jobs or sell the house, I replied matter-of-factly. Since the property belongs to me, I'll be making those decisions going forward based on what's best for my financial interests, not your convenience. Mom's manipulation attempts became increasingly desperate. Karen, you can't abandon your family when we need you most. We made mistakes, but we're still your parents. Family forgiveness is more important than money or legal problems. Family forgiveness requires family accountability, I replied. You've had years to choose honesty over fraud and legitimate work over criminal schemes. Instead, you escalated your exploitation while planning to drain even more of my resources. I stood up and collected my documents, leaving copies of the most damaging evidence on their coffee table. You have until Friday to decide whether you want to work with my attorney on restitution agreements or wait for criminal charges to be filed next week. Criminal charges! Madison squeaked, her Portland dreams evaporating as she faced potential felony prosecution. Identity theft, credit fraud, tax fraud, unemployment fraud, medical fraud, and grand larceny, I enumerated calmly. Andrea says the federal charges alone could result in significant prison sentences, especially with your extensive pattern of financial crimes and conspiracy. I walked toward the door, leaving them to process the complete reversal of our family power structure. Their confident manipulation had become desperate bargaining as they realized I'd been preparing for this confrontation while they'd been planning additional exploitation. "Where are you going?" Dad called after me, his voice cracking with panic. "To my new apartment to finish packing," I replied without turning around. "Tomorrow I'll be leaving some final documents for you to review. After that, all communication goes through attorneys unless you're prepared to begin legitimate restitution negotiations." I spent my last night in the house I legally owned, but had never truly controlled, carefully organizing the final documents that would spell out exactly how dramatically their situation was about to change. My childhood bedroom looked strange with most of my belongings packed away, but the clarity of purpose felt liberating after years of confusion about my role in this family's dysfunction. The manila envelope I prepared contained multiple sections, each addressing different aspects of their criminal activities and financial obligations. I wanted everything documented clearly so there could be no misunderstandings about consequences or expectations going forward. The first document was a formal eviction notice prepared with legal guidance from my consultation with Morrison and Associates. As a legal owner of the property, I was giving them 30 days to vacate or begin paying market rate rent of $2,400 monthly. The notice included details about Illinois landlord-tenant law and consequences for non-compliance. The second document was a cease and desist letter demanding immediate termination of all identity theft activities, including closure of credit accounts opened in my name without authorization. The letter specified that continued use of my identity for any financial purposes would result in immediate criminal prosecution with no opportunity for negotiated settlement. Third was a comprehensive breakdown of financial restitution demands, itemizing every fraudulent transaction, stolen inheritance payment, and unauthorized account activity I'd discovered. The total exceeded $67,000, including interest and penalties calculated according to federal guidelines for identity theft damages. The fourth document contained screenshots and printed evidence of Madison's social media posts proving education fraud, luxury spending funded by stolen money, and her admission during recorded conversations that she'd been lying to everyone about school enrollment. This evidence would be provided to Portland Art Institute and potentially to federal prosecutors investigating education fraud. The fifth document was a formal complaint filed with the Illinois Department of Employment Security regarding Dad's unemployment fraud, including photographs of his construction work vehicles and witness statements from neighbors who'd observed his unreported employment activities. The complaint also referenced his threats of workplace harassment as evidence of ongoing criminal behavior. The sixth document addressed Mom's disability fraud, including screenshots of social media posts showing activities incompatible with her claimed medical limitations. The evidence would be forwarded to Social Security Administration investigators and potentially to federal prosecutors handling medical fraud cases. The final document was the restraining order petition I'd prepared ready for immediate filing if they attempted workplace harassment or continued threatening behavior. The petition included recorded conversations where Dad had threatened to sabotage my career, and Madison had discussed plans to steal additional money from me. Each document was professionally prepared and legally reviewed to ensure compliance with federal and state requirements for criminal complaints and civil recovery actions. My attorney had helped structure everything to maximize legal impact while providing opportunities for negotiated settlement if they chose cooperation over continued resistance. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table at 5 a.m, knowing they'd find it when they came down for breakfast. The timing was deliberate, early enough that I'd be gone before they discovered it, but late enough that they wouldn't have time to organize coordinated harassment or manipulation attempts before I'd already left for my new apartment. My car was packed with essentials, and my forwarding address had been updated with banks, employers, and service providers. I'd also arranged for mail hold services to prevent them from accessing any correspondence that might arrive at the house during the transition period. The symbolic weight of leaving my childhood home felt significant but not painful. This house represented years of manipulation, exploitation, and emotional abuse disguised as family obligation. Walking away meant choosing my own welfare over their convenience, prioritizing honest relationships over dysfunctional loyalty. I drove to my new apartment as the sun rose over Arlington Heights, watching the familiar neighborhood recede in my rearview mirror. My phone was already buzzing with calls from unknown numbers, probably Dad trying to reach me from different phones as he discovered the extent of documentation I'd left behind. The apartment I'd chosen was a one-bedroom unit in a secure building in Evanston close to my office and completely separate from any location they could easily access. The building required keycard entry and had security cameras in all common areas, providing protection against harassment or confrontation attempts. My first task was setting up secure internet and updating all passwords for financial accounts, email, and social media. Identity theft protection services had been activated for all my accounts, and my credit reports were now monitored for unauthorized activity attempts. The second task was organizing evidence files for my attorney consultation, scheduled for Monday morning. Andrea Chen's office had already reviewed preliminary documentation and confirmed that my parents' activities constituted serious federal crimes with substantial civil liability implications. By noon, my phone had received 43 missed calls and 17 text messages, escalating from confusion to anger to desperate bargaining as my family processed the legal and financial catastrophe they were facing. I read the messages carefully, but didn't respond, letting them understand that their manipulation tactics were no longer effective. Madison's texts were particularly revealing, "You can't destroy our family over money," followed by, "Dad says you're bluffing about the lawyers." Then, "Please call me, we can work this out without involving outsiders." And finally, "You're gonna regret this when everyone finds out what kind of person you really are." The progression from entitlement to threats confirmed that I'd made the right decision about legal protection and documentation. Their immediate response to consequences was escalation and blame rather than accountability or genuine remorse. Dad's messages focused on financial panic. "The mortgage payment is due next week, and we can't cover it without your help." Then, "You're going to force us into bankruptcy and homelessness," followed by, "No judge will side with an ungrateful daughter who abandons her family." Mom's messages attempted emotional manipulation. "I can't believe my own daughter would try to send her parents to prison." Then, "Your father is having chest pains from stress, and it's your fault," followed by, "Grandma Rose would be ashamed of how cruel you've become." Each message provided additional evidence of their refusal to accept responsibility for consequences they'd created through years of criminal behavior and financial abuse. Their focus remained on blaming me for discovering their activities, rather than acknowledging the harm they'd caused through systematic exploitation. My phone finally stopped buzzing around 2 in the afternoon, probably because they'd realized their communication attempts were being documented and could be used as evidence of harassment. The silence felt peaceful after hours of desperate contact attempts and increasingly threatening messages. I spent the evening organizing my new apartment and reviewing legal documents, feeling genuinely hopeful about my future for the first time in years. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter where my financial resources supported my own goals, rather than enabling other people's criminal activities and entitlement. The envelope I'd left on their table contained everything they needed to understand their situation and make informed decisions about their response. Whether they chose cooperation or continued resistance, I was prepared for either path and protected by legal documentation they could no longer dismiss or manipulate. The silence from my family lasted exactly 18 hours before my new apartment building's security called to report people demanding access to see me. Through the lobby cameras, I watched Dad pacing frantically while Mom sat crying in a chair and Madison stood with her arms crossed looking angrier than I'd ever seen her. The security guard explained they'd been there for 2 hours, becoming increasingly agitated when told I wasn't available for visitors. "Tell them I'll communicate through attorneys only," I instructed the guard watching through the security monitor as Dad's face turned red with rage at this message. He started shouting something about ungrateful daughters and family obligations, causing other residents to stare as they passed through the lobby. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered to hear frantic sobbing that I eventually recognized as Mom's voice. "Oh, Karen. Please, you have to help us," she begged through her tears. "The electric company called this morning and said service will be disconnected tomorrow. I didn't know you'd been paying the bills automatically. We thought it was coming out of Dad's account." The reality of their financial dependence was hitting them in waves as automated payments stopped and service providers demanded immediate payment for overdue accounts. Without my subsidies, their household expenses exceeded their legitimate income by almost $3,000 monthly. While the gas company wants $478 for past due amounts, Mom continued desperately. ComEd says we owe $632. The internet got shut off this morning, and Madison is having a complete breakdown because she can't access her social media accounts. I listened without commenting as Mom detailed their financial crisis. They'd been living beyond their means for years, assuming my support would continue indefinitely, regardless of their behavior or my own financial needs. The automated payments I'd set up to help temporarily had become permanent solutions they'd taken for granted. "Your father tried to get a loan from the bank, but they said his credit is too damaged from the unemployment issues," Mom explained through hiccuping sobs. They asked about assets and income, and when he mentioned the house, they wanted proof of ownership. The house ownership revelation must have been devastating. They'd been living in property they couldn't claim as collateral because legal documents proved it belonged to me. Their attempts to leverage home equity for emergency loans had exposed the truth about their financial situation to banking officials who now understood they owned nothing of value. Madison's credit card stopped working yesterday, Mom continued. She was at Target trying to buy groceries and the card got declined. She tried 3 different cards and they were all maxed out or frozen. She had to leave the cart full of food and call us to pick her up. The credit cards opened in my name had reached their limits, and my fraud alerts had triggered automatic account freezes when unusual spending patterns were detected. Madison's lifestyle of casual spending had collided with financial reality in the most public way possible. She's been crying for hours because Tyler broke up with her, Mom added. He found out about the school situation and said he couldn't date someone who lies about everything. He's going to Portland Law School without her, and now she has nowhere to go and no money for her own place. Madison's Portland dreams had evaporated along with her boyfriend's trust and her access to fraudulent funding. The elaborate lies she'd maintained about graduate school had been exposed, destroying her relationship and her relocation plans simultaneously. Dad took the phone from Mom, his voice hoarse with desperation and barely controlled rage. "This is insane, Corinne," he said. "You're destroying your own family over money and legal technicalities. We raised you, fed you, gave you a home for 28 years. Now you want us homeless and bankrupt because of some paperwork mistakes?" "Paperwork mistakes," I repeated calmly. "Identity theft and federal fraud are paperwork mistakes." "We never meant to hurt anyone," he pleaded. "Everything got complicated and we made some bad decisions, but we're still your parents. You can't just abandon us when we need help the most." The reversal was stunning. 24 hours earlier, Dad had been threatening my career and demanding $6,000 for Madison's fake tuition. Now he was begging for basic assistance with utilities, while admitting their financial situation was unsustainable without my support. "The mortgage payment is due Friday," he continued desperately. "We need $2,047 or the bank starts foreclosure proceedings. Without your help, we'll lose everything." "You don't own the house," I reminded him. "I can't lose what you never possessed." "But where will we live?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I'm 56 years old with bad credit and no steady income. Your mother can't work because of her health problems. Madison has no job skills and no education credentials. We'll end up homeless." The health problems he referenced were part of Mom's disability fraud, and Madison's lack of job skills was the result of 25 years of enabling her laziness and entitlement. Their dire situation was the logical consequence of choices they'd made consistently over decades. "We could lose the house, but we could also go to prison." Dad continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The unemployment office called yesterday asking about unreported income. They want documentation and interviews next week." The investigation I triggered was proceeding faster than expected. Government agencies took fraud seriously, especially when provided with comprehensive evidence and witness statements. Dad's comfortable fraud scheme was unraveling as investigators discovered the scope of his unreported work. "Social Security wants to meet with your mother about her disability claims," he added. "They have questions about recent activities and medical consistency. If they determine she's been fraud, she could owe back payments plus penalties." Mom's medical fraud was being scrutinized by investigators who specialized in detecting inconsistencies between claimed limitations and actual activities. Her social media posts provided evidence that would be difficult to explain during official interviews. Madison got a letter from Portland Art Institute asking about her withdrawal and refund. Dad continued, "They want to verify enrollment records for some kind of federal review. She's terrified they'll report her to authorities for education fraud." The comprehensive nature of their criminal activities, meant that each investigation would likely trigger additional scrutiny from related agencies. Federal authorities shared information across departments, ensuring that fraud in one area led to examination of other potential violations. "Ah, please, Corinne," Dad whispered. "We know we messed up, but we're family. Can't we work this out without lawyers and police and government investigations? Can't we find a way to fix this together?" But fixing their situation would require fundamental changes in their approach to work money and personal responsibility. Years of criminal shortcuts and exploitation had created obligations they couldn't meet through legitimate means. Their desperation was real, but their willingness to change remained questionable. I hung up without responding, leaving them to face the consequences of their choices without my intervention or support. Their comfortable exploitation of my resources was ending, but their criminal liability was just beginning as government investigations proceeded with the evidence I'd provided. Over the next week, my family's desperation transformed into a coordinated harassment campaign that revealed the depths of their manipulation skills and their complete inability to accept responsibility for their situation. My building's security guard began recognizing them on site as they appeared at different times of day, sometimes separately and sometimes together, always demanding to see me and becoming increasingly agitated when denied access. Madison tried the most creative approaches, apparently believing her charm could succeed where direct confrontation had failed. She sent flowers to my office with a note reading, "Sisters forever, let's talk." When that didn't work, she had pizza delivered to my new apartment with a message asking me to call her, written on the inside of the box lid. She even tried getting herself hired as a temp worker at Henderson and Associates, though Human Resources quickly discovered her fabricated resume and escorted her from the building. Her social media campaign was more sophisticated and potentially more damaging. Madison created fake Instagram accounts using photos stolen from my college friends' profiles, then sent me direct messages claiming to be concerned acquaintances who'd heard disturbing rumors about my treatment of family members. The fake accounts praised her artistic talents and questioned my motivations for destroying such a creative and loving sister over minor financial disagreements. Dad's approach focused on professional intimidation, calling my office repeatedly with different stories designed to make my employers question my reliability and character. He claimed I was having a mental health crisis and needed intervention. He suggested I was embezzling company funds to support a gambling addiction. He even tried reporting me to the Better Business Bureau for fraudulent business practices related to my freelance work. But Henderson and Associates had dealt with family harassment situations before, and their legal department was well equipped to handle attempts at workplace intimidation. They documented every call, saved every voicemail, and filed complaints with appropriate authorities about harassment targeting their employees. Mom took a different approach, enlisting extended family members in a manipulation campaign designed to pressure me through guilt and social obligation. She called my Aunt Sarah in Phoenix, claiming I was trying to have my parents arrested over minor misunderstandings about money. She contacted my cousin David in Milwaukee, saying I was refusing to help with Dad's medical expenses during a health crisis. The problem with Mom's approach was that our extended family knew our dynamics well enough to ask pointed questions about the situation. Aunt Sarah called me directly after Mom's tearful phone call, and when I explained the identity theft and inheritance fraud with supporting documentation, she was horrified rather than sympathetic. "Your grandmother specifically mentioned being worried about your parents taking advantage of you," Aunt Sarah told me during our 2-hour conversation. "She said she was leaving you the house because you were the only one who understood the value of hard work. I should have checked on you years ago." Cousin David had a similar reaction when he learned about the systematic financial abuse and criminal activities. Instead of pressuring me to reconcile with my parents, He offered to testify about conversations where Dad had bragged about getting Corinne to cover expenses, and Madison had complained about having to pretend to care about school to keep money flowing. Their recruitment of family members as manipulation tools backfired spectacularly as relatives learned the truth about their criminal activities and my years of financial exploitation. What was supposed to be a guilt campaign became an evidence-gathering operation as family members shared their own observations about suspicious activities they'd noticed over the years. The most disturbing escalation came when they hired a private investigator to follow me and document my daily activities. I noticed the same car parked outside my apartment building and workplace for 3 consecutive days before my building security identified the surveillance and contacted police. The private investigator, a sketchy character named Rick Hoffman, who specialized in divorce cases and insurance fraud, had been hired to find evidence they could use to discredit me or force negotiation. Dad wanted photographs of me spending money on luxury items to prove I was financially secure enough to continue supporting them. Madison wanted evidence of a secret relationship or lifestyle they could use for emotional manipulation. When police questioned Hoffman about his surveillance activities, he immediately provided copies of the contract Dad had signed and recordings of conversations where my family discussed plans to find dirt they could use against me. The investigator was facing his own legal problems and had no loyalty to clients who couldn't pay his fees without bouncing checks. The surveillance revelation triggered additional legal protections as my attorney filed for an emergency restraining order based on stalking and harassment evidence. The court granted temporary protection while scheduling hearings for permanent orders that would legally prohibit my family from contacting me or approaching my residence and workplace. Meanwhile, their financial situation continued deteriorating as utilities were disconnected and creditors began collection proceedings. The house I legally owned was becoming uninhabitable as services were terminated for non-payment, forcing them to choose between admitting their situation to friends or living without electricity, gas, and internet access. Madison moved in with her friend Ashley, whose parents reluctantly agreed to temporary housing after hearing Madison's version of events. But Ashley's family soon discovered Madison's lies about her situation when police contacted them as part of the harassment investigation, leading to another eviction as they learned about her criminal activities and manipulation tactics. Dad tried borrowing money from former coworkers and drinking buddies, but his reputation in the construction community had been damaged by his unemployment fraud investigation. Men who'd worked with him for years were now being questioned by federal investigators about his unreported income, making him a liability rather than a trustworthy friend. Mom's disability fraud investigation was proceeding rapidly as Social Security Administration officials reviewed her medical claims against evidence of activities incompatible with her reported limitations. Her doctor visits increased dramatically as she tried to establish medical documentation supporting her disability claims, but investigators were already analyzing years of inconsistent records. Their coordinated harassment campaign had actually strengthened my legal position by providing additional evidence of their refusal to accept accountability and their willingness to escalate criminal behavior when faced with consequences. Every threatening phone call, every workplace intimidation attempt, every social media manipulation tactic was documented and added to the growing file of evidence against them. By the end of the week, their desperation had transformed into panic as they realized their situation was deteriorating faster than their harassment campaign could generate pressure for reconciliation. Their criminal liability was expanding while their financial resources were being depleted through legal fees and private investigator costs they couldn't afford. The family meeting they'd originally planned to pressure me into compliance had become a criminal conspiracy that was being investigated by multiple government agencies with federal jurisdiction. Their comfortable exploitation of my resources had evolved into a legal nightmare that threatened to destroy everything they'd built through years of fraud and manipulation. 3 weeks into their harassment campaign, Madison made a decision that would destroy whatever remained of their family unity. Facing potential federal charges for education fraud and terrified by the reality of criminal prosecution, she contacted my attorney directly offering to cooperate in exchange for immunity from charges related to the Portland Art Institute scheme. Andrea Chen called me on a Thursday morning to explain Madison's offer and its implications for the overall case against my parents. Your sister is willing to testify about your parents' criminal activities in exchange for dropping charges related to her education fraud, Andrea explained. She claims your parents orchestrated the entire scheme and that she was manipulated into participating against her better judgment. The irony was stunning. Madison, who'd been the primary beneficiary of their criminal activities and had actively participated in exploiting my resources, was now positioning herself as a victim of parental manipulation in order to escape consequences for her own choices. She's provided detailed information about your parents' planning process for the inheritance theft, Andrea continued. According to her statement, your father researched the legal requirements for accessing your trust fund 2 months after your grandmother's funeral. Your mother helped him practice forging signatures, and they specifically discussed keeping the inheritance secret from you. Madison's cooperation revealed the premeditated nature of their financial crimes. This wasn't a series of desperate decisions made during financial crisis. It was a calculated plan to steal my inheritance while maintaining the appearance of legitimate family financial management. She's also admitted to helping them monitor your bank accounts and credit reports, Andrea added. Your parents had her track your spending patterns and income sources so they could adjust their demands accordingly. She knew about the identity theft and helped them time credit card applications when you were too busy with work to notice immediately. The systematic nature of their surveillance and exploitation was more extensive than I'd realized. Madison hadn't just benefited from their crimes, she'd been an active participant in planning and executing financial abuse designed to maximize their extraction of my resources. Most damaging for your parents is her testimony about the unemployment and disability fraud, Andrea continued. She has photographs of your father working construction jobs while collecting benefits, and she's witnessed your mother planning activities specifically to avoid Social Security surveillance. Madison's evidence could essentially guarantee criminal convictions for both parents while positioning herself as a cooperating witness rather than a co-conspirator. Her betrayal was strategically brilliant and morally devastating, abandoning her parents to save herself while claiming victimhood. But Madison's cooperation offer came with demands that revealed her continued entitlement and lack of genuine remorse. She wants financial support for living expenses while the case proceeds, Andrea explained. She claims she has no income sources and nowhere to live because your parents' criminal activities destroyed her reputation and relationships. Even while betraying her parents to escape criminal liability, Madison was trying to negotiate continued financial support from me. She viewed her cooperation as a service that deserved compensation, rather than as accountability for her participation in criminal activities. She's also demanding that you not pursue civil recovery for money she spent from your trust fund, Andrea added. She argues that she was manipulated into accepting money she didn't know was stolen, and that requiring repayment would be unfair given her cooperation. Madison wanted immunity from both criminal charges and financial consequences while maintaining that she deserved ongoing support because her crimes had been exposed. Her betrayal of our parents came with expectations that I should reward her cooperation with continued enabling of her lifestyle. I declined Madison's cooperation offer, instructing Andrea to pursue maximum charges against all 3 family members, regardless of their willingness to testify against each other. If Madison wanted to cooperate with prosecutors, she could do so without expecting financial rewards or immunity from consequences. Madison's reaction to my rejection was immediate and explosive. She called me directly, screaming about ingratitude and betrayal before I could hang up and add another harassment violation to her growing legal problems. But her attempt to save herself by betraying our parents had already been discovered by Dad, who learned about her cooperation offer when prosecutors contacted his attorney about potential plea negotiations based on new evidence from a family member. Dad's response to Madison's betrayal was swift and merciless. He kicked her out of the house, immediately telling neighbors and former friends about her attempt to send him to prison in exchange for avoiding consequences for her own criminal activities. He also provided prosecutors with evidence of Madison's active participation in planning their criminal schemes, undermining her claims of manipulation and victimhood. Your father is now claiming Madison was the mastermind behind the inheritance theft, Andrea informed me during our next conversation. He says she researched your grandmother's will, discovered the trust fund, and pressured him to access the money for her education and lifestyle expenses. The blame shifting between family members was providing prosecutors with detailed confessions and contradictory statements that made conviction virtually guaranteed. Their attempts to escape individual responsibility were creating comprehensive evidence of conspiracy and criminal planning. Mom tried to remain neutral in the conflict between Dad and Madison, but her position became impossible when both sides demanded her support for their contradictory versions of events. She finally broke down, completely providing her own confession to investigators in hopes of receiving lenient treatment for cooperation. Your mother has admitted to all charges and is requesting a plea agreement based on her cooperation and acceptance of responsibility, Andrea explained. She's provided documentation of the entire criminal enterprise, including financial records your father tried to destroy. The complete collapse of their family unity was destroying their ability to mount coordinated defense strategies while providing law enforcement with overwhelming evidence of their criminal activities. Their betrayals of each other were more effective than any prosecution strategy could have been. Madison's attempt to escape consequences by betraying her parents had backfired spectacularly. Instead of gaining immunity, she'd triggered a family civil war that exposed additional criminal activities while destroying any remaining relationships or support systems she might have relied upon. Her cooperation offer had revealed her continued belief that her problems should be solved through other people's resources and sacrifice. Even while facing federal charges, she expected to be rewarded for telling the truth about criminal activities she'd actively participated in for years. The golden child who'd been protected and enabled throughout her life was finally experiencing real consequences without family members willing to sacrifice themselves for her comfort. Her panic and desperation were genuine, but her response remained focused on avoiding accountability rather than accepting responsibility for her choices. Dad's rejection of Madison's betrayal attempt had left her completely isolated with no income, no housing, no family support, and no romantic relationship. The lifestyle she'd maintained through fraud and exploitation was ending permanently, while criminal charges threatened her freedom and her future. Her strategic betrayal had failed to achieve its intended goals, while accelerating the legal proceedings that would determine her fate. The cooperation she'd offered was no longer needed, as family members provided evidence against each other in desperate attempts to minimize their own criminal liability. 6 months after leaving the documents on my family's kitchen table, I sat in the Cook County Courthouse watching my parents and sister accept plea agreements that would forever change their lives and vindicate every decision I'd made to protect myself from their exploitation. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over the sentencing hearing with the careful attention to detail that had made her one of Chicago's most respected criminal court judges. She'd reviewed hundreds of pages of evidence documenting my family's systematic financial crimes, and her comments throughout the proceedings made clear that she understood both the scope of their criminal activities and the impact on their victim. Dad was sentenced, first pleading guilty to identity theft, tax fraud, unemployment fraud, and grand larceny. His attorney had negotiated a plea agreement that resulted in 2 years probation instead of federal prison time, contingent on full restitution and community service requirements that would dominate his life for the foreseeable future. Mr. Walsh, your criminal activities represent a systematic exploitation of government programs, financial institutions, and family members over a period of several years, Judge Morrison stated during sentencing. Your victim impact statements indicate that your daughter provided over $47,000 in financial support while you stole her inheritance and used her identity for fraudulent credit accounts. The restitution order required Dad to repay $68,000 in stolen money, fraudulent benefits, and legal damages, plus interest calculated at federal rates. His construction license was permanently revoked, and his criminal conviction would appear on background checks for any future employment opportunities. Your age and lack of prior criminal history warrant consideration for probation rather than incarceration. The judge continued, but your refusal to accept responsibility until faced with overwhelming evidence suggests a character that requires intensive supervision and accountability measures. Mom's sentencing reflected her cooperation with investigators and her admission of guilt for disability fraud and conspiracy charges. She received 18 months probation and was required to repay $24,000 in fraudulent disability benefits, plus additional penalties and administrative costs. Mrs. Walsh, your medical fraud not only stole money from programs intended to help genuinely disabled individuals, but your false claims potentially delayed assistance for people with legitimate needs. Judge Morrison explained, your cooperation with investigators demonstrates some recognition of wrongdoing, but the systematic nature of your fraud requires significant accountability measures. Mom's probation included mandatory counseling for prescription drug dependency issues that had been discovered during her medical fraud investigation. Her Social Security benefits were permanently terminated, and she was prohibited from applying for any federal assistance programs for 5 years. Madison's sentencing was the most dramatic, partly because she'd continued lying to investigators even after her cooperation offer was rejected. She pleaded guilty to education fraud conspiracy and identity theft charges, receiving 2 years probation plus 800 hours of community service. Ms. Walsh, you are 25 years old with no employment history, no education credentials, and no apparent job skills, Judge Morrison observed with obvious frustration. Your criminal activities funded a lifestyle of leisure and consumption, while your victim worked multiple jobs to support your family's household expenses. Madison's restitution order was relatively modest at $12,000, reflecting the smaller amount she'd personally received from fraudulent activities. However, her criminal record would make employment difficult, and her community service requirements included financial literacy classes and job training programs. Your cooperation attempt with prosecutors was undermined by continued deception about your level of participation in these crimes. The judge continued, your victim impact statements suggest a pattern of manipulation and entitlement that requires intensive intervention to prevent future criminal behavior. The civil recovery proceedings that followed criminal sentencing awarded me additional damages for emotional distress, legal expenses, and lost business opportunities. The TechStart lawsuit had been settled when my attorney demonstrated that the laptop theft was part of a broader criminal conspiracy with my family's insurance, ultimately covering the damages. The systematic exploitation documented in this case represents one of the most comprehensive examples of family financial abuse I've encountered in 23 years on the bench, Judge Morrison stated during her final comments. Ms. Karen Walsh demonstrated remarkable courage and preparation in exposing these crimes and protecting herself from further exploitation. The legal vindication was complete and overwhelming. Every decision I'd made to document their activities, consult with attorneys, and pursue criminal prosecution had been validated by judicial findings and criminal convictions. Their years of manipulation and exploitation had been officially recognized as serious crimes worthy of significant punishment. But the emotional satisfaction came from watching my family finally face consequences for choices they'd made consistently over decades. Their comfortable fraud schemes were permanently ended, their criminal records would follow them forever, and their financial obligations to me would continue for years under court supervision. Dad's construction career was finished, limiting his future earning potential to minimum wage jobs that would barely cover basic living expenses after restitution payments. His unemployment fraud conviction would prevent him from accessing many government programs, while his criminal record would make housing and employment applications difficult. Mom's disability fraud conviction meant losing the fraudulent benefits she'd relied on while gaining a criminal record that would affect everything from employment to housing applications. Her prescription drug issues would be monitored by probation officers, and her medical care would be scrutinized for any signs of continued fraud attempts. Madison faced the greatest long-term challenges because her criminal record would compound her lack of job skills and education credentials. Her community service requirements would consume significant time for the next 2 years, while her restitution obligations would require her to find steady employment for the first time in her life. The house I legally owned was transferred into my name completely, with my family required to vacate within 60 days, unless they could pay market rate rent that none of them could afford on their legitimate income. Their comfortable exploitation of my property was ending permanently. Most importantly, the restraining orders were made permanent, legally prohibiting them from contacting me at homework or through third parties. Their harassment campaign was officially recognized as criminal behavior, with violations subject to immediate arrest and additional charges. The legal proceedings had taken 6 months from initial filing to final sentencing, but the results were comprehensive and definitive. Every aspect of their criminal enterprise had been exposed, prosecuted, and punished through both criminal justice and civil recovery systems. My attorney's final invoice included a breakdown of recovered assets and damages that exceeded $115,000, representing full compensation for their theft, plus additional penalties and interest. The money would rebuild my emergency fund while providing security against future financial emergencies. The courthouse steps felt symbolic as I walked away from the building where my family's criminal activities had been officially documented and punished. 6 months earlier, I'd been their victim, unknowingly subsidizing their lifestyle while they planned additional exploitation of my resources. Now I was their creditor, legally entitled to ongoing restitution payments while protected by permanent court orders against further harassment. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Their comfortable fraud schemes were permanently ended, their criminal liability was established forever, and their ability to exploit my resources was legally prohibited. Justice had been served comprehensively and decisively. 1 year after my family's sentencing hearing, I stood in my new downtown Chicago office space watching my design team of 12 employees prepare for our biggest client presentation yet. Walsh Creative Services had grown from my freelance operation into a full-service marketing agency specializing in brand development for ethical startups and established companies seeking authentic messaging strategies. The transformation had been remarkable, fueled by the energy and creativity that had been suppressed during years of family financial stress and emotional manipulation. Without the constant drain of supporting their fraudulent lifestyle, my business resources could be invested in growth opportunities, professional development, and strategic partnerships that had previously been impossible. Janet Morrison from TechStart Solutions had become my first major client after their investor funding succeeded despite the initial presentation delay. Her recommendation led to contracts with other venture-backed startups who valued working with a design firm that understood both creative excellence and ethical business practices. Word-of-mouth referrals had generated more work than I could handle, alone necessitating the transition from freelance designer to agency owner. My personal life had transformed equally dramatically. The engagement ring on my finger represented a relationship with Marcus Chen, Andrea's younger brother, who'd supported me through the legal proceedings while helping me understand that healthy relationships were built on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. His background in nonprofit management had taught him to recognize manipulation tactics and emotional abuse, making him an invaluable partner during my recovery from family trauma. The Patterson Industries presentation looks incredible, Marcus said, reviewing the brand identity materials we'd prepared for a sustainable packaging company. Your team's work on environmental messaging really captures their mission without sounding preachy or corporate. The ability to choose clients based on values, alignment rather than financial desperation had revolutionized my creative process. Walsh Creative Services specialized in working with companies that prioritize social responsibility, environmental sustainability, and ethical business practices. Our client roster included solar energy startups, organic food producers, educational technology companies, and nonprofit organizations creating positive social change. My team reflected the values-based hiring approach I developed after years of being exploited by family members who contributed nothing while demanding everything. Every employee had been selected for both professional skills and personal integrity, creating a workplace culture based on mutual support and shared commitment to excellent work. Corinne, the community center, called about next week's workshop, said Jessica, our newest designer and a recent graduate from Columbia College, Chicago. They're expecting 15 people for the financial literacy presentation, including some family abuse survivors who specifically requested information about protecting assets from exploitative relatives. The community workshops I'd started 6 months earlier had become one of my most rewarding professional activities. Speaking about financial abuse and family exploitation helped other victims recognize manipulation tactics while providing practical strategies for protecting their resources and emotional well-being. I've prepared handouts about documentation techniques and legal resources. I replied, organizing materials for the presentation. Andrea's office has volunteered to provide free consultations for workshop participants who need immediate legal intervention. The support group that had grown from these workshops now met monthly at our office space, providing ongoing assistance for people recovering from family financial abuse. Many participants shared stories remarkably similar to mine. Years of supporting relatives who demanded gratitude while systematically exploiting their generosity and success. My former family home in Arlington Heights had been converted into a duplex rental property that generated monthly income while providing affordable housing for graduate students from Northwestern University. The symbolic transformation of their former exploitation base into a resource for hardworking students felt appropriately poetic. Dad's restitution payments arrived monthly through the court system, providing steady documentation of his ongoing accountability for the crimes he'd committed. His employment at a big box retail store was the best job he could secure with his criminal record, and his paychecks barely covered basic living expenses after restitution, obligations, and probation fees. Mom had moved into a subsidized senior housing facility after losing the house and being unable to afford private rental apartments on her reduced income. Her disability fraud conviction had made her ineligible for most assistance programs, forcing her to rely on charity organizations and part-time work at a local thrift store. Madison's community service had been completed at various social service organizations around Chicago, where she'd slowly begun to understand the difference between genuine need and entitled demands. Her required financial literacy classes had taught her basic employment skills leading to a job at a call center that represented her first steady paycheck. Your cousin David called this morning. Marcus mentioned checking our office phone messages. He wanted to thank you again for helping his daughter with college application materials. He says she's been accepted to 3 schools with partial scholarships. The extended family relationships that Mom had tried to weaponize during their harassment campaign had actually been strengthened by the truth about my situation. Relatives who learned about the systematic financial abuse had been horrified and supportive, offering assistance and expressing regret that they hadn't recognized the exploitation earlier. Uncle David's daughter Emma had benefited from both design services and college planning advice when her parents couldn't afford professional assistance. The work had been donated through our community service program, which provided free marketing materials for worthy causes while building positive relationships with genuine family members. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel wants to interview you about the financial abuse awareness campaign. Jessica added, reviewing our media requests. They're doing a feature story about family exploitation and want to include practical advice for victims. Media coverage of financial abuse issues had generated national attention for the workshops and support groups we'd established. Speaking publicly about my experience had connected me with advocacy organizations, legal professionals, and other survivors working to raise awareness about family financial crimes. The interview requests were carefully screened to ensure focus on prevention and recovery rather than sensationalism about my family's criminal activities. The goal was educating potential victims about warning signs while providing resources for people currently experiencing exploitation. I've prepared talking points about documentation strategies and legal protections. I replied, reviewing my notes for the upcoming interview. The most important message is that family financial abuse is a crime, not a personal failure or relationship problem. My phone buzzed with a text from Andrea. Federal prosecutors in Portland want to consult on a family fraud case similar to yours. Can you participate in a conference call next week? Law enforcement agencies had begun consulting with me about other family financial abuse cases, recognizing my experience with documentation techniques and legal strategies. The systematic approach I developed for protecting myself had become a model for other investigations and prosecution efforts. The office space that housed Walsh Creative Services was located in a building that promoted sustainable business practices and supported women-owned enterprises. The location reflected my commitment to working within communities that valued ethical practices and mutual support rather than exploitation and manipulation. Looking around the bustling office, filled with talented professionals creating meaningful work for worthwhile clients, I felt a satisfaction that had been impossible during years of family exploitation. The energy and creativity that had been suppressed by financial stress and emotional manipulation were finally being channeled into building something valuable and sustainable. The transformation from victim to survivor to advocate had taken exactly 1 year, but the journey had established foundations for continued growth and positive impact. My business success was meaningful because it was built on genuine achievement rather than family obligation. My relationships were healthy because they were based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Most importantly, the work I was doing helped other people recognize and escape from exploitation, while building ethical alternatives to manipulation-based relationships. Every client project, every workshop presentation, every support group meeting contributed to creating a community where success was celebrated rather than resented, where achievement was supported rather than exploited. The life I'd built after leaving my family's toxic dynamics was better than anything I could have imagined while trapped in their system of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. freedom from their exploitation had created space for authentic relationships, meaningful work, and genuine prosperity that benefited everyone involved, rather than just the most manipulative family members. On my 30th birthday, exactly 2 years after receiving that devastating text message from Dad, I opened my mailbox to find a handwritten letter from Mom with a return address from the subsidized housing facility where she'd been living since losing her disability benefits. The envelope felt heavier than a standard letter suggesting additional contents beyond whatever message she'd written. Inside, I found a 3-page letter written in Mom's careful cursive along with photocopies of what appeared to be savings account statements and a cashier's check for $847. The letter began with words I'd never expected to read from her. Dear Corinne, I know I have no right to contact you after everything we put you through, but I wanted you to know that I've been attending therapy sessions required by my probation, and I'm starting to understand how much damage we caused to you over the years. The letter continued with details about her counseling sessions where she'd been forced to examine her role in enabling Dad's criminal activities while exploiting my financial generosity. Her therapist had helped her recognize that family love required respect for boundaries, not endless demands for sacrifice from the most responsible family member. I've been working at the Salvation Army thrift store for 18 months now, and I'm saving every penny I can to pay you back for the money we stole. The letter explained. The enclosed check represents 6 months of savings from my part-time wages. I know it's not much compared to what we took from you, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making restitution beyond what the court required. The voluntary restitution was unexpected, representing money she could have used for her own comfort, but had chosen to save for repaying debts that legal proceedings hadn't fully addressed. Her wages at the thrift store were minimal, making every dollar in that check a significant sacrifice. Madison has been writing to me from Portland, where she moved after completing her community service. Mom continued. She got accepted to a community college program for medical office administration, and she's working as a hotel housekeeper to pay for classes. She asked me to tell you that she's finally learning what it means to earn something through work rather than manipulation. Madison's transformation seemed genuine based on Mom's description, but I noted that her communication was still indirect, rather than taking responsibility for contacting me herself. Whether her change was permanent or temporary remained to be seen, but her commitment to education and employment represented progress from her previous lifestyle of entitlement and fraud. So your father has been the hardest for me to understand, Mom admitted in the letter's most painful section. He's still angry about the criminal charges and blames you for destroying the family instead of accepting responsibility for his choices. He's living in a rooming house and working at Home Depot, but he hasn't changed his attitude about what happened. Dad's continued anger wasn't surprising, given his lifelong pattern of blaming others for consequences of his own choices. His inability to accept responsibility had been evident throughout the legal proceedings, and his resentment was probably intensified by the daily reminder of his reduced circumstances. I want you to know that I understand why you had to protect yourself from us, Mom wrote in the letter's conclusion. We taught you that family meant obligation and sacrifice, but we never showed you that real family means love and respect. You deserve relationships that build you up instead of tearing you down, and I hope you found people who appreciate the wonderful person you are. The letter ended with a request that surprised me with its wisdom and restraint. Instead of asking for reconciliation or contact, Mom simply asked that I consider forgiving her someday for my own peace of mind, regardless of whether we ever spoke again. I sat in my office reading the letter while my team prepared for our afternoon client meeting, processing emotions that were more complex than I'd expected. The anger and betrayal I'd felt 2 years ago had been replaced by something closer to sadness for the family relationships that could have been possible if they'd chosen honesty and respect over exploitation and manipulation. Marcus found me at my desk 20 minutes later, reviewing Mom's letter and the voluntary restitution check she'd sent. That's a significant amount of money for someone working part-time at minimum wage, he observed, understanding the sacrifice her payment represented. What do you think about her request for forgiveness? I think forgiveness is something I can consider for my own benefit, I replied thoughtfully. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what they did or allowing them back into my life. It means releasing the anger that doesn't serve me anymore. The personal growth I'd experienced over 2 years of therapy, healthy relationships, and meaningful work had taught me the difference between forgiveness and enabling. I could acknowledge Mom's apparent change while maintaining boundaries that protected my continued well-being. Are you planning to respond to her letter? Marcus asked gently. I think I'll send a brief note acknowledging her payment and wishing her well in her recovery process, I decided. But I'm not ready for ongoing communication, and I may never be ready for that kind of relationship again. The conditional nature of my response felt appropriate given the history of manipulation and the ongoing legal protections I maintained against unwanted contact. Mom's letter suggested genuine remorse, but actions over time would be the real test of whether her changes were permanent. That evening, Marcus and I celebrated my 30th birthday at the lakefront restaurant, where we'd had our first date 18 months earlier. The contrast with my 28th birthday couldn't have been more dramatic. Instead of devastating text messages and family betrayal, I was surrounded by friends and colleagues who genuinely cared about my happiness and success. I have something I've been saving for tonight, Marcus said as we finished our dinner, producing a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. It's not an engagement ring, he added quickly, seeing my expression, but it is something that represents our future together. Inside the box was a beautiful antique key ornately designed with intricate engravings that caught the candlelight. It's the key to the house I'm buying for us in Lincoln Park. Marcus explained, his eyes shining with excitement. The realtor said it was built in 1928, so it's exactly as old as you are. I thought that was perfect symbolism for new beginnings. The house key represented everything my family's exploitation had nearly prevented. The ability to build an authentic life with someone who viewed my success as something to celebrate rather than exploit. Our relationship was based on mutual support and shared values, rather than financial obligation and emotional manipulation. There's one more surprise, Marcus added, pulling out his phone to show me photographs of the house's interior. The previous owner was a graphic designer who converted the 3rd floor into a studio space. It could be perfect for your community workshops or as a satellite office for Walsh Creative Services. The creative space represented possibilities for expanding my advocacy work while maintaining the professional success that provided security and independence. The integration of personal and professional growth felt symbolic of the healthy life I'd built after escaping family exploitation. As we walked along Lake Michigan after dinner, I reflected on the journey from victim to survivor to advocate that had defined my 20s. The text message that had devastated my 28th birthday had ultimately led to legal justice, professional success, and personal relationships that honored my worth rather than exploiting it. What's the most important lesson you've learned over the past 2 years? Marcus asked as we watched the city lights reflect on the water. That love and respect are not negotiable, I replied without hesitation. Real family supports your growth instead of exploiting your generosity. Real love celebrates your success instead of resenting it. And real relationships require mutual respect, not just obligation and guilt. The wisdom I'd gained through surviving family financial abuse and building authentic relationships had prepared me to help other victims recognize manipulation while providing practical strategies for protection and recovery. The pain of my experience had been transformed into purpose that benefited others facing similar exploitation. As we reached our car, I made a mental note to donate Mom's voluntary restitution payment to the support group fund that helped other victims pay for legal consultations and emergency assistance. Her money would contribute to helping people escape situations similar to what I'd survived, creating positive impact from the consequences of her past choices. The next morning, I would send Mom a brief note acknowledging her payment and expressing hope for her continued growth while maintaining the boundaries that protected my well-being. I would also continue building the life and relationships that honored my worth while helping others recognize and escape from exploitation disguised as family love. 2 years after that devastating birthday text, I had achieved something my family's manipulation had been designed to prevent: complete independence, authentic relationships, and the freedom to use my success for purposes I chose rather than obligations others imposed. Have you ever found yourself financially supporting family members who seemed to take your generosity for granted? How do you think you would handle discovering that the people you trusted most had been systematically exploiting your resources while lying about their own situations? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a thumbs up to help others who might be dealing with similar family financial abuse find these insights. Your support helps raise awareness about exploitation tactics that too many families use against their most successful members. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family dysfunction and building healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and guilt. There are so many people who need to hear that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for creating authentic connections. Please share this story with anyone who might benefit from understanding the difference between genuine family support and systematic financial exploitation. Sometimes people need permission to protect themselves from relatives who disguise their greed as family obligation. Thank you for taking this journey with me and for understanding that real family love requires respect for boundaries, celebration of success, and support for individual growth rather than exploitation of generosity.